Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for, is the rest of the weekend in college football. And let's get to the big game, the notable game on the schedule, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, Georgia and Florida, because while the game on the field wasn't that interesting, what happened after the game is absolutely worth discussing, okay? So first of all, you go back to Friday, and on this show, listen, I get a lot of stuff wrong, but I said, I think Georgia's going to win pretty convincingly. Florida, I don't buy that some, magic elixir has been discovered because they beat a bad South Carolina team. And Georgia, I know they had Brock Bowers hurt, but they're actually getting healthier later in the year. They're getting guys back from injury, and you never want to give Kirby Smart a reason to feel like his team is being doubted because you're going to get the best version of Georgia if that's the case. Well, that's exactly what happens. Georgia beats Florida 43-20. Florida actually had a garbage time touchdown. They were trailing by 30 for most of the fourth quarter. So Georgia wins. And if that was all that happened, just that result, I really wouldn't spend that much time talking about it. But it was what happened after the game that does feel like it is worth discussing here on a Monday Aaron Torres pod. And that is, did you see Kirby Smart go after former Florida head coach Dan Mullen? So Dan Mullen now works for ESPN. He's been out at Florida for 2 years. And I guess on Friday, Dan Mullen puts out, picks on Twitter, like a pretty normal thing to do. And among his picks on Twitter on Friday was, I'm picking Florida to beat Georgia. I'm not really that surprised. He's the former Florida coach, probably lives in the Gainesville community still. Makes sense for him to like Florida to win that game, even if I think in his heart of hearts, he knows one team is better than the other. I bring it up because Florida definitely did not win. And after the game, Kirby Smart was asked about Dan Mullen picking against him. Here is what Kirby Smart had to say about the whole ordeal. He said, yeah, somebody texted me before the game. It's like all these people predicting that we're not going to win today. I'm just like, golly, where is that coming from? You're supposed to be my friend, talking about Dan Mullen now. He didn't like to recruit, though, so it gets him. So how about that from Kirby Smart? So Kirby Smart asked about Dan Mullen picking against the Georgia Bulldogs, and he said, yeah, good guy. Thought he was my friend. But he didn't really like to recruit, and that's why he's in that. He didn't say this part, but he's like, that's why he's in that TV booth instead of on the field coaching against me. To which I would say, one, I love when coaches really speak their mind. Two, I love Dan Mullen, but Kirby's kind of right on this one. And it's something we talked about when Dan Mullen was fired, but it is worth revisiting here. First of all, respectfully to Dan Mullen, the numbers speak for themselves. Went back and looked it up just for fun. Kirby's math checks out, okay? So Dan Mullen was hired in the winter of 2017. 2018 recruiting class was ranked 14th nationally. And you want to give Dan Mullen a little bit of a pass on that one, taking over for a previous head coach, whatever. Well, it's 3 full recruiting classes. The number 9 recruiting class in the country, the number 9 recruiting class in the country, and the number 12 recruiting class in the country in 2021. So it was obviously going backwards, and it was all at a time when Georgia was recruiting at just an insane level, and they obviously still are. Those same 3 years where Florida went 9-9-9 in terms of recruiting rankings, Georgia went 2, number 1, number 4. And it is worth noting they also had the number 1 class in 2018, the year before Dan Mullen got there, or the year that Dan Mullen got there. And then 2022, they were number 3 behind Texas A&M and Alabama. So those two guys are just not built like each other. Kirby Smart is dead right. And let me go back to when Dan Mullen was fired. When Dan Mullen was fired, I actually largely defended the firing for this exact reason. If you're a longtime listener to the show, you probably remember this. But when Dan Mullen was let go, a lot of people, it's too soon. And if you remember, he had just won the SEC East the previous year, lost to Alabama in the SEC title game. People said it's too quick, it's too this, it's too that. And I said, the problem is the talent in the program continues to get worse and worse every year. And remember, that year they lost to South Carolina, they lost to Missouri late in the year. And if you remember, I said, the problem is it's not just where are you right now, it's do you have the right coach to turn things around and get things back on track? And I said at the time, I was like, Dan Mullen has given us no reason to think that he is going to put in the work on the recruiting trail to get the players that you need to compete at the highest level. Because Dan Mullen's a guy, and we all watch Swamp Kings and we know he's a smart guy, good play caller. But you can scheme up anything you want. If you don't got the guys to execute it, it really doesn't matter. And so I didn't blame Florida for firing Dan Mullen in the winter of 2021. And I'll also say this. It's why I've tried to be patient with Billy Napier. Now, some of it I think is on Napier. As I said a few weeks ago after they lost to Kentucky, he's had four portal cycles, to get more talent on this roster. The winter when he took over, then the spring, then last winter, then last spring. But at the same time, the cupboard was left completely bare by Dan Mullen. I said this when Florida lost to Kentucky. I said 2021, Dan Mullen's last year, I remember watching Florida and being like, there is nothing special about this team. Then last year I watched Florida and I remember texting a buddy of mine who is a Gator fan. And I said to him, this looks like the least talented Florida team that I have ever seen in my life. He said, yeah, no, it is. I've been a Florida fan for 25 years and it absolutely is. And I would argue this team might even be less talented based on all the guys that they lost off last year's team headlined by Anthony Richardson. So I give Billy Napier a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. He is recruiting well. And I'll say this for Billy Napier. You can argue about him on game day, play calling, this, that, the other thing. At least Billy Napier kind of gets to recruit at the highest, to win at the highest level, we have to recruit at the highest level. And at least he's attempting to do that. To his credit, Florida has the number 3 recruiting class in the class of 2024. Actually had a great recruiting week during the bye. Number 1 defensive lineman in the country, LJ McCray, committed to the Gators. He's a Florida kid. They also have DJ Lagway, one of the top quarterbacks in high school football, committed to the Gators as well. So we will see if Billy Napier's the guy. We will see if he won't. But it's hard for me to blame him because Dan Mullen did not leave very much in the cupboard. It's worth mentioning, by the way, a lot of the best players that he had were troublemakers that Billy Napier had to get out of the program once he got there. So anyway, I could go on and on, but I thought it was an amazing quote. And bluntly, I think Kirby Smart was actually pretty accurate on it. So I thought it was at least worth discussing.